Happy game week, ladies and gentlemen. That's right. Ohio State finally plays the season opener on Saturday. Berm, what time is it?
It's apparently at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I almost said Eastern Central Time. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at the famed Horseshoe, also known as Ohio Stadium, on the banks of the Olentangy. So I hope to see everyone there.
That's right. Ohio State and Akron finally this week, season opener 2024. Long awaited. This offseason has been very long. And training camp, though, it felt like it went pretty quickly. So once we get in season, Mondays have traditionally been a little bit of a rewind. So I thought maybe on this Monday version of the podcast daily that Berm and me, Austin Ward, could talk about the biggest developments that happened for Ohio State in the month of August to get ready for this opener on Saturday. And all of those conversations, look, if you've been following along, it's probably not news to you, but some people jump in like, hey, give me the Cliffs Notes for training camp. And that has to start at quarterback, right?
I think so. I mean, when you are entering a season where you don't have a returning starter quarterback, that is always the most intriguing position on the field. That's certainly a spot where Ohio State made the decision to bring in Will Howard back in December. And I think they've been validated and / vindicated with that so far. It seems like Will has really emerged, not just to see him developing as a passer and getting better in that respect, which was the one area that I think people would look at him and be like, oh, is that good enough for Ohio State? But the thing with a team like this, with a team with so many returning leaders, is that quarterback room, especially when you don't have a returning starter, that guy could have easily like slunk into the background and just been a guy who shows up and does, what he's asked to do without really emerging as a leader. And Will has certainly done that. And he's been pushed in that regard by Devin Brown, who's continued to be a leader on the field and off the field. So I think it's a room that we should feel way better about than we did a year ago based on everything we've seen and heard. And to me, that's certainly worth noting.
I think the leadership part is pretty important. Now we're going to see on Saturday what Will Howard leading this offense and Chip Kelly's influence and all that stuff is going to look like against Akron. It's not going to be the greatest barometer of what the Buckeyes are going to look like in big time games, of course. But I do think there's a really interesting piece to that where, from outside of the program looking in, people last year wondered if Kyle McCord had that mentality to lead the program. You kind of knew that Devin Brown would be able to win over people with his enthusiasm and exuberance and competitiveness. And I think that part, Will Howard is so mature that he had already been a starting quarterback who'd won a conference championship, all these things that we've talked about a bunch of times. But if he didn't come in and actually act like an alpha from day one, Devin Brown was going to do that. He was challenging not just on the field, but also perhaps in the locker room, because there were already so many people who knew what Devin Brown could provide inside the quarterback meeting room, inside locker room, out on the practice field, and all those things. So I think that wound up being a real advantage, not just in terms of the quarterback depth. If Ohio State needs to go to the backup with Devin Brown at some point this season, he's in his third year. But it also, I think, helped not just push Will Howard to compete physically, but also to make sure that he was doing everything to win over his new teammates in the quickest timeline possible.
Yeah, and that's not something that you develop, honestly. Like that innate leadership is innate. It's something that you either have or you don't. And Will Howard, coming from Kansas State, coming from being a 3-star quarterback prospect out of Downingtown, PA, there's a chance that guy doesn't have that. And it seems like, that question got answered pretty early, and then everything else has had a chance to catch up. Like the ability to learn how to handle the offense, to learn the playbook, to grasp the complete control of the huddle. Like those are the things that Ryan Day has said that he's done. He's got complete command of the offense, is what Ryan Day has said multiple times. Like those things were going to happen over time regardless, but coming in and proving that you can be the leader in the weight room, being the leader on the practice field, like those are the things that you either have or you don't. And clearly Will Howard had it, which is why he was targeted by Ryan Day, which is why he was targeted by Lincoln Riley. I've seen USC folks in the last couple of weeks start to really pump up this the Miller Moss bandwagon that they want people to get on, but they were trying to replace Miller Moss with Will Howard at some point. So I think that you can feel pretty comfortable if you're an Ohio State fan heading into this week about the quarterback room, because it's not just Will Howard, it's the depth now that they have that they did not have a year ago with the addition of Julian Sand, the continued improvement of Lincoln Keenholz, and now the steady climb that we've seen Aaron Nolan make throughout fall camp. So it's a much better room than it was a year ago. And in Ryan Day's era at Ohio State, that's never been a question. So to have that put to bed should make people feel pretty good.
Yeah, I think that people were also hoping to get some clear-cut resolution. We mentioned a couple weeks ago at the midpoint check-in on a Monday that it's a real benefit of this roster that Ohio State has assembled that there are not a ton of open positions available in the starting lineup. We spent a ton of time in the offseason mentioning right guard. We talked about what was going to happen at tight end and whether Sonny Styles would wind up solidifying himself at the will linebacker. And then that was pretty much it. And I would say as you get to game week here, like one of those things definitely happened. One of those is not entirely clear, although I think the depth of the room allows maybe the tight ends to play more collectively than they have in the last couple of years. And then the other, I've come around to the idea that maybe they don't have to have an option at right guard that's the number one.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that the decision to move Sonny Styles to linebacker back in the spring was something that seemed inevitable. And it's also something that could have been met with some resistance by Sonny Styles, who had played a safety position in high school, who had played safety the first 2 years in Columbus. But he has fully embraced being that guy. And what that has done, number one, I think it's challenged CJ Hicks to get even better, which everyone we've talked to has said that he has. I'm not sure that that's meaning that he's going to, force himself to split all the reps with Sonny Styles, but he's going to be on the field a lot. He's going to have a role. But in totality, the linebacker room is so much better and so much better position than it was 6 months ago that I think that might be even more so than quarterback. I think that's the one spot, the one position group where you're like, man, that spot has really elevated itself. And that starts with Sonny Styles. It also is a byproduct of Cody Simon, his leadership, but also people kind of figuring out for the first time that his leadership is pretty damn important to this team. And then that's CJ Hicks improvement, Gabe Powers improvement, and of course, who we've talked about nonstop in the last 3 weeks is Arvell Reese. Like now you have 5 linebackers there, and Peyton Pierce is starting to surge a little bit for a group that 2 years ago really felt like there was a very unclear path to the future. Like there is no doubt about it that room is in a way better spot. At right guard, you have the potential to play a guy that was a top 40 recruit, Integra Shabola, or a guy that started 12 games last year for Ohio State. That's a pretty good and/or for me. And at tight end, I don't think it matters one bit who the starter is at tight end. So I'm not going to try to pretend like I do. I think that you're going to see all those guys play. But as we talked about last week, the right guard battle, I think, is going to carry on into the season. I think you can get to Michigan State before you have to figure that out entirely. And the way that fall camp happened with the illness that went around and Carson Hinsman missing probably like half the time, I think that's perfectly fine the way that it can work out.
Yeah, I think if we're going to do a full rewind of what happened in August, like day one, we're like, well, that's weird. Illness on the offensive line was already popping up. Carson Hinsman wasn't out there at practice. Of the first 8 practices, there were 5 viewing periods that were available to the media, and Carson Hinsman missed 2 complete days of that practice. And then we saw on that 5th practice, which was the 8th overall for Ohio State, a week into camp. By the end of that practice, they were down to like 10 or 11 scholarship linemen out there because they were going through this illness. And they also, have other nicks and bumps and bruises that happen throughout a training camp. So like there was a ton of attention on Ohio State to erase the memory of the Cotton Bowl. No one can ever forget that performance from the offensive line. Now, it wasn't the actual Ohio State starting offensive line in totality. That doesn't matter. Once you put on the scarlet and gray uniform, you're going to be judged accordingly. So I certainly get that. It was on the heels of the final play in the Big House, which did not go Ohio State's way, which if it blocked differently, maybe the entire season and the entire offseason has a different tenor to it. I get all that as well. But coming on the heels of that and what seemed like a really good spring for Ohio State and encouraging stuff from Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer solidifying himself at right guard and having Donovan Jackson back and Seth McLaughlin coming in, and then a good battle with Carson Hinsman and Integra Shabola. It's like, man, that just sucks for them. Like, even Justin Fry was hurt in training camp. Like
Yeah.
his calf popped, and like that's not how anybody wanted that to go because they have so much to try and prove and so much to get right. Not saying that this will keep them from doing that, but those first 2 weeks were a real grind for them, and it did keep them from maybe finding a clear cut five that they wanted to roll with. But there's also a world where maybe it didn't because other guys were emerging and making moves like Austin Saraveld or Luke Montgomery. We're like, hey, you don't have to just have just five and pray that nobody gets hurt. This is suddenly a group that has gone through a lot of adversity, even just in a training camp situation against a very good defensive line, and is now finding 8, 9, or maybe 10 guys who could potentially play. You still want that narrowed down to 5 and maybe a sixth guy who's the swing guy, and that may well be Carson Hinsman. But that's just a really fascinating subplot for the way this season is going to play out for them because they effectively wound up a couple weeks behind.
Yeah, and it's hard to erase that memory of the Missouri game. That was as bad a performance by an Ohio State offensive line as I've ever seen. And it's made particularly bad by the fact, you move some guys around, but you had a sixth-year guy in Matt Jones at center. You had a fourth-year guy in Enoch Vamahi out there. You figured that you should feel comfortable, like, hey, we're going to be okay. We've got these veterans, and they were bad. Like bad. So it is interesting because I know those guys have carried a pretty hefty chip on their shoulder into this offseason and certainly frustrated that they didn't come out of the gate in fall camp with a full complement of their guys ready to rock and roll. But in some ways, I think that that's actually going to end up being a benefit for Ohio State because we've seen George Fitzpatrick and Zen Mahalski and Austin Saraveld be forced into more reps and more opportunity. And by all accounts, those guys have really stood up and done a great job. So now you maybe when you had questions about exactly how many guys do we have that can play, I think you have a clearer answer now how many that number is. And we don't know it entirely, but I think the way Ryan Day talked about Zen Mahalski and about Austin Saraveld last Thursday night and in his lightning round following practice, like I think you could actually feel better about that than you would have if we knew 3 weeks ago who the five were. So, I think that things are actually turned out to be a little bit of a blessing in disguise.
Weirdly,
that's optimistic berm.
There he is. Weirdly, the actual intrigue this week may be at left guard because Donovan Jackson's situation throughout the month, where he has not been a full participant in every practice. I don't know his snap count throughout the entirety of the month, but I do know that there has been an injury that has been separate, a minor injury. Let me stress that he's continued to be in uniform. He was asked about it himself on Thursday, and he said, "Hey, I don't know what you're talking about. I'll see you on Saturday." If they were playing for the national championship on Saturday, he would probably take every snap. They were playing Akron. I would think there's probably a world where he doesn't need to play every single snap. What would that mean for the rest of that rotation? I don't know. Could be both Carson Hinsman and Tegra Shabola at times against Akron. I'd be pretty surprised if Donovan Jackson didn't start, but how long does he need to stay in there? I don't know. Ohio State's schedule allows flexibility for the first few weeks where you don't have to put all those veterans out there for a ton of reps. Certainly someone who's played and had as many starts as Donovan Jackson is not going to need that playing time. It's the fine line because you're going to want to get the rust off at some point. You have to play football at a physically demanding position like left guard. You need to go, bang some bodies and ones that maybe you're not seeing on the practice field at some point to make sure that when you get to those talent equated games, which will be coming, there's a Big Ten game against Michigan State, but I'm thinking more of like along the lines of October. You want to make sure that he's more ready for that than an opener, even if he's a senior and he came back and he wants to be out there for every opportunity. That's probably the most, under the radar subplot for this week. You want to see the quarterback. You want to see how Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson play together. You want to see the debut of Jeremiah Smith. All those things are great. Those are the main attractions. But underneath that is like, how bad was that at times for Donovan Jackson, and how will Ohio State manage that throughout September?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that you are aware of is always possible in August. Guys get hurt. That's what happens when you play football. And Donovan, seeing him coming off the field on Thursday night, did not seem to have any sort of lingering issues. He was fully taped up. He was fully spatted up. He was in full pads. But you don't need to go 100% of the snaps for him against Akron. So I think that's probably, again, a good thing. Timing is good. You just hope it's not something that lingers throughout the year and that it's been able to be taken care of. There are other positions like safety, for example, where Lathan Ransom missed the last month of the season a year ago because of injury, and he didn't really participate fully in the spring, and he's ready to go now 100%. But like, you have guys like Malik Hartford and Jalen McClain and Jaden Bonsu emerging. I almost think that you're in the similar position with him. Like, you're going to want to get him off the field by halftime if you can. Like, this game against Akron is going to provide Ohio State a nice opportunity to make sure that the depth that they think that they've accumulated throughout spring and fall is actually good enough to do it in the game. Because even though it is against Akron, like that's those guys are on scholarship too. That old quote, that old cliche. So I want to see Jalen McClain. I want to see Jaden Bonsu. I want to see Malik Hartford out there, and not just out there for one play and then off the field for the rest of the game like he was in a couple games last year. So I think that this Saturday provides an opportunity for Ohio State to do a lot of that across the board. I think that there are some spots where you're definitely want to get as many reps as you can for like Will Howard. I think that even though you have a pretty deep quarterback room behind him, I think you need to make sure he has as many reps as he can take reasonably. If it's 63-0 at the end of the first half, certainly don't play him in the second half. But if the offense doesn't come out of the gate looking absolutely electric and smooth, I don't want to see him taken off the field in order to get someone else on it. That's not the case on defense. It's not the case at left guard for me. So, doing this little review, we're talking about the positions that and the things that we had questions about at the start of camp that seem to have been solidified. What are the areas that, Austin, for you are still question marks?
We've talked a lot about the tight ends. I don't know that I view them as a question mark, really. I think that the combination of Will Kazmarek and G. Scott, although I think there's another, his wrist and hand was taped up a little bit. We know he missed some time a bit throughout August. Jelani Thurman has been pushing, I think, to make that group stronger and elevate the talent. Bennett Christian, I think, can definitely go out and bury some people as a blocker. So I think that that's the most unproven group. And in terms of question marks, I think that would be where it would have to go. But that's really nitpicking for how talented this team is. You and I have mentioned this at the midway point. We talked about it in the offseason. Like, this is really a rare collection of talent. And I'm not meaning that in like the way that Urban Meyer or Jim Tressel have brought it up, where it seems like it's just ramping up the pressure on Ryan Day. And it's like, hey, if you mess this up, buddy, like, that's fully on you. I'm talking about the rare opportunity to watch this offense and defense, even when they're competing against each other. You don't see a lot of practices like it. And I'm wondering what it will look like once they all get back out there, because they have talked about wanting to prove themselves as the hardest working team in the country, and that they don't want the no talent issues to stand in their way. That starts against a team that you would expect, well, you're Ohio State, you roll your helmet out there. It's an in-state MAC opponent. Going to be pretty easy for you. How seriously are you going to take it? Again, I'm not trying to put too much stock into one game. We'll see how this plays out over the course of the year. The only comparison in my mind that I can make is like the 2015 team had this much talent. We can debate whether it was more or less or the same. They'd already accomplished something.
It was more.
Okay. We'll have that conversation again when the NFL draft evaluators have their say at the end of the year. And not for me to say. But the point is, they had accomplished something, and you could get this sense of complacency that was growing for them, and they never snapped themselves out of it. This team doesn't have that luxury. They haven't won it. The seniors are going to and have made it a point. There's no gold pants. There's no Big Ten trophy. They haven't won a national championship. They haven't won a playoff game. Like, all those things should fight off the complacency. But they've also been told for the last 9 months how good they are, and that they have assembled an all-star team, and that they are embracing a national title or bust mentality. I want to see that actually play out on Saturdays. And I'm not bringing that up to say that I'm questioning that they will do that. I guess I don't. I have incredible respect for the leadership group that is at the top of the depth chart here for Ohio State. And I think that after some of the adjustments that were made to the coaching staff, they are much better positioned to fully maximize on the field the at potential. So, but it does become a matter at some point where you have to go out and play the games, and the talking subsides, and then you have to go back it up. So again, it's not a question mark. It's just something that now I'm ready to see.
No, I mean, I think it actually is a question mark. I mean, we hear so much, and we get a chance to talk to the coaches throughout the month of August. Like, none of them are standing up on the podium saying this is the best team I've ever coached. They're all saying, hey, we've got to improve here. We got to improve here. But I think about like watching Florida State on Saturday, and every year the conversation around DJ Uiagalelei is like, oh, well, this is the guy who's perfect for this offense, right? Like, and then they come out and are afraid to let him throw the football beyond 5 yards down the field. Like, there's a lot of conversation about how improved Will Howard is. Like, I want to see that. I want to see Ohio State come out and trust him. And that involves Ryan Day. That involves Chip Kelly. So if don't just talk about it, be about it, essentially, is what I want to see. And I'm wondering, the more I think about it, Urban Meyer's insistence on talking about how talented this roster is and how it's the most talented roster in the last decade, I think he's probably going back to the 2015 roster and realizing that they flubbed up. And I wonder if in some way he's trying to use that to motivate Ryan Day as opposed to putting pressure on Ryan Day, because I hadn't really thought of it in this way, but like Urban Meyer's most talented team at Ohio State didn't win a national championship. And that is probably something that annoys him to this day. And to this point, Ryan Day's most talented team, the 2019 team, didn't win a national championship. But I think he gets a little bit of a pass on that year because he was in year 2 as a head coach. And maybe it wasn't fair to expect that from a guy who had not ever been in those positions before. But like, you've been there now. There's no excuses anymore. This is year 6 for you. You have every idea what you're doing with your roster. You are taking a step back to be the CEO. You're surrendering play calling. You're doing all those things. So we've talked so much about it for the last 9 months. Now it's time to go out there and prove it. If you think that Will Howard is the guy to lead this offense, let him be the guy to lead this offense. If you think that you're going to have a team that is harder working than any team and has more depth than you've ever had, play the depth. If Larry Johnson says he has 4 starting defensive ends, play them all. If you think that James Laurinaitis says, I'm going to play the guys who are ready to play, then play them all. Like, don't go into this and then all of a sudden turtle and say, hey, well, these are the guys we're going to trust. Like, you've said it all, you've done it all. Like, so now it's time to let it rip. And I think that the biggest thing for Ohio State is to make sure that they don't start worrying about how they've always done it. And that's my biggest concern about a first-time head coach, because I think sometimes you end up leaning on your experiences rather than your expectations and rather than what you actually have in your room. And I think and I hope that the Chip Kelly edition is what's going to prevent Ryan Day from doing that. And so if that's the case, then we're going to find out early. And it doesn't matter if it's against Akron. It doesn't matter if it's against Western Michigan. Like, you're going to go out and win those games 70-0. Like, those are not games you should be winning 35-13. Like you got last year's Youngstown State game. Like, that is not what this team is built for. And if they are winning games in that way, it's because of the coaches. So like, there's no letting up this year. And so I think back to like 95, 96, Ohio State playing Rice and Pitt and winning 72-0. Like, just go out and dominate people. You have way more talent than 90% of the teams you're going to play this year. If you aren't going out there and absolutely pedal to the metal the entire game, then it's on the coaches. And that is going to really, I think, be a cause for concern as the season progresses.
I think that's why you brought up Ryan Day's most talented team, his first one there in 2019. Like, until they lost in a game that, frankly, they should have won if not for outside influence, in my opinion. I guess I can't empirically prove that, but there did not seem like Ohio State did enough wrong, but they had won every game by double digits up to that point. And that was a pedal to the metal, even late in that game when they had all those things go against him. And Ryan Day's like, doesn't matter. 4th and 2, we're going deep. 4th and 1, throwing deep. Like, he was not afraid. And he's made this point a lot about the players and the last several years and not beating Michigan and the scars that they needed to develop to take the next step. I think that Ryan Day's pretty scarred, and I think it impacted. He may be talking about himself at the same time he's talking about the players. I think there have been times we've mentioned this where he has felt those scars and walked up to the edge and backed away just a little bit in a way that he didn't when he was so fearless in 2019 when it was Ryan Day's going to go prove himself as a coach. Some people don't think that he'd earned this opportunity. Some people did. I'm not saying that it was unanimous by any stretch of the imagination, but he was a first-time head coach. He wanted to prove that he belonged. He had a talented team. He did not want to be the one that was accused of messing it up. An officiating review and a blown call and a lot of other things stood in his way against Clemson in the Fiesta Bowl. He did everything that he possibly could in that situation. And I think there have been multiple examples that we have pointed out. It's not going to be news to anyone, not going to be news to Ryan Day, where he has not approached the program or even in-game situations the same way that he did when he hadn't been burned by any of those decisions. And so if you want to put a question mark on that, Berm, like that was the way that you teed this up. It's not just like, what's the mentality of the team? What's the mentality of Ryan Day? Is he fully back? I think that the last 9 months have suggested he's making aggressive decisions with his staff. He's made aggressive decisions with his roster, most notably at quarterback. He has retained the talent. They're developing it at a high level. All the pieces are in place there. This is fully his program now in a way that it wasn't in 2019. How does that impact him? What does Chip Kelly mean to that? What does Jim Knowles mean to that now in year 3? If it's 4th and 2 on the 30-yard line again, what's the call here? Like, I'm not saying he's going to make the play call. You going to go for it? Or are you going to push the envelope in a way that you used to? Or are you scared of, and I shouldn't even use that term, are you worried about misfires on fake punt situations that it blew up in your face and, decide to get a little bit more conservative? If this team's going to win at the highest level and the playoff is going to be really difficult and it's several months down the road, those are not games that you can coach with a fear of the worst case scenario. And there have been times that I think Ryan Day has done that in the last several years.
Yeah, and here's the thing. You enter this season with national championship or bust expectations. You also enter this season with the opportunity to lose a game or two and still make the playoff and still win a national championship. So, there should be no fear or no reluctance to do whatever you think is going to win you the game for your team. So, I thought that the thing about the early era of the Ryan Day tenure was that he, as you said, it was fearless. It was like, well, screw it. We don't win this game. We don't win this game. And it changed after the 2021 loss to Michigan. And then we saw a glimpse of the old thing in the 2022, Peach Bowl against Georgia. And then last year, it was, I think, in some ways hampered by the fact that he didn't trust his quarterback enough last year. And we can debate whether that's a him problem or a quarterback problem. I don't know that it's entirely one or the other, but you have selected all of this now. So there can be no reluctance. There can be no fear. And again, it may not seem like it matters because it's starting the season with Akron, but it starts day one. You got to go out and put it down.
That's right. Yep. And it does start now. It starts on Saturday at 3:30. Our game week coverage has already begun with the podcast daily for Monday. We will be at Roosters later on in our new-ish temporary home on Henderson. About 11:30 or so we'll be in there. If you wanted to catch it live, we call it the live show, but you all know it's recorded. There's also the debut on the Kings of the North channel. They're going at noon, Berm. Noon. Doug and Bill going live with the
5 days a week
debut of that show. So you can catch that as well.
I'm sure they're going to talk about Ohio State over there, but if you're looking for more of a comprehensive view of football around the country and especially Northern football, then that's the place to be at noon, Monday through Friday. They're going to have a lot of different types of talk, but obviously they're going to talk about Ohio State because guess what? Ohio State is the flagship program of the North.
They are the actual king of the North, as it were. So that is rolling out with the live version starting later on today. Thursday night, if you wanted to hang out, we've got weekend kickoff back. We're going to do that before the 4 biggest regular season home games for Ohio State. That is a logistical importance. That is of logistical importance for us and also just to make it easier because like we have to leave on a Thursday for Oregon this season, for example. So the first one of those is before the season opener. So Bryant Heating and Cooling Systems bringing that back. We're going to have Michael Bennett and Zach Bourne hanging out with me and Berm at Fairway Columbus. That is 7:00 on Thursday. There will be some social media reminders of that if you want to come out and hang out. That will be in person. We have speakers and set up. Berm's already worked on all the tech details. We did one there before the spring game. So that will be back on Thursday night. Tuesday, Ryan Day's press conference. That'll stream on the podcast channel. We have availability on Wednesday night. We'll have snap judgments both days, Tuesday and Wednesday. There is no Ryan Day lightning round anymore on Thursdays, so we'll regroup, but we'll have the podcast daily every single day as well. I think that's it. Did I miss anything, Berm?
Pre-game live show on Saturday. We'll have, there's going to be there. At this point, I don't think we're going to have a post-game live show with Doug and Bill specifically about Ohio State, but they will be doing a Northern live show that will obviously include the Buckeyes. So all of the things that we've done in the last few years are going to be in play, and some of them are going to be maybe set up a touch differently, but we're looking forward to just getting back to regular football. And if you can get out to the Fairway Columbus on Thursday night, that's going to be a heck of a good time. So we look forward to seeing everyone all week. Anywhere we are going to be, you're more than welcome to be also, people.
Come hang out because the football season is officially here. The season opener is Saturday at 3:30 in the Horseshoe. We can't wait, and we appreciate you hanging out right here with us on the podcast daily on a Monday to start it all off. He's Berm, I'm Austin. We will talk to you later.